will be talking about Russia and the emerging Policentric world order, the phenomenal rise of China, and different alliances. Let me introduce our session chair. Honorable Ambassador Mustafa Kamal Kazi has served as Ambassador of Pakistan to Russia, the Netherlands, Indonesia, Iraq, Tokyo, Paris, Addis Ababa, and Stockholm. He was also permanent representative of Pakistan to the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons and alternate member of the UNESCO Executive Board, Paris. Ambassador Kazi has the distinction of serving in the highest civil service rank for 7 years. He is associated with think tanks at home and abroad. He is a member of the advisory board of the Center for International Strategic Studies, Sindh, Karachi, established by the Spatial Plan Division, Rawalpindi. He has been invited as a speaker by think tanks in Morocco, Turkey, Iran, China, Germany, and the Czech Republic. Over to you, Chair.
Ambassador Masuma Hasan, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be part of this panel. We have very interesting topic, power alignments on the world stage. We have very distinguished panel, Dr. Vasily Kuznetsov from Russia. He'll speak on Russia and emerging polycentric world order, followed by Ambassador Nagmana Hashmi, who is a great expert on China, who will speak on the phenomenal rise of China. And afterwards, Ambassador Zamir Akram, he'll speak on have defense alliances brought peace, global peace, very important subject. Ambassador Zamir Akram is author of a very important book that has come out in the last, I think, 2 years or so, yeah? And it's worth reading by everyone who wants to understand the process of nuclearization and Pakistan's, becoming a nuclear power. So we start with Dr. Vasily Kuznetsov. Is he there?
Could you just
request
the crowd not to talk because the speaker will get very disturbed. What's the other show? So you could tell them to sit down maybe?
Yeah, but क्या देखें? Online ही है? Is he there? उनको
चलिए मैं कह देती हूँ. Excuse me, because our guest will be online, could we request the audience at the back to kindly take your seats, because online it's difficult to really listen to the speaker. So would you please sit down? Thank you.
A little introduction to our speaker. Dr. Vasily Kuznetsov is a deputy director of the Institute of Oriental Studies in the Russian Academy of Sciences. He is the head of the Center for Arab and Islamic Studies of the same institute. He's written a number of books and articles. He is a very distinguished academic from Russia.
I will talk about Russia and the emergent polycentric world order. And first of all, let me thank Dr. Masuma Hasan for organizing this conference, for inviting me to participate in it. It's a great pleasure. And I believe that the anniversary of the Bandung conference, which we are celebrating this year, gives us a good opportunity to discuss the role and place of Global South in the changing world order. I should talk about Russia's approach, but I would like to start with something slightly different. This conference is called The Struggle Continues. We spent the entire first half of the day discussing the spirit of Bandung and the ideas laid down in 1955. In everything I heard, there were many very important things that one can be agree with. But it seems to me one important thing wasn't said. The Bandung Conference united countries, nations that were fighting against colonialism for independence. The leaders who participated in it devoted their lives to fighting against the oppression of their peoples. It gave birth to the non-aligned movement. That's right. And all this means that Bandung's self-determination was negative, apathetic. It was a conference against colonialism, discrimination, racism, etc. And the non-aligned movement makes sense if there are alliances that you don't have to join. However, today we live in a different world. Yes, of course, the negative phenomena that Bandung mentioned at the Bandung conference and in the Bandung declaration are changing form, but they remain. However, as the self-awareness of the global south grows, its role in the world economy and politics increases, the question becomes increasingly important. What alternative will it offer to the world that was created by the global West? This alternative can't consist only of antonyms. You can't say justice instead of injustice, equality, sovereignty, or the right of nations to self-determination instead of oppression. Because this would mean using the same language, the same categories that the colonialists used. If you say so, it will only mean an attempt to extend the global south the same principles that the West once developed and which it applied to itself. Sukarno, in his famous speech Indonesia Accuses, said that he wasn't fighting a particular national government, but imperialism and colonialism as a system. However, like other great leaders of that time, he didn't take the next step. He didn't propose a fundamentally different system. Today, it seems to me, it is time to talk about exactly this, about a different system operating with different concepts. And one of our colleagues who made speech at the previous session, he talked about it. Now I will turn to the question of Russia, and then I will return to this idea. Over the last 3 decades, Russian foreign policy has passed through several stages of development. The current stage started in 2010s. It is characterized by a belief that the Western-centric world is gone forever. The era of the human history that had begun with the Age of Discovery and was completely established in the 18th, 19th centuries is coming to an end. The main feature of that era has been the West's domination in military, political, economic, technological, and, most important, conceptual fields. Nowadays, the problem is that the Western-centric model phases out, taking along a number of institutions that have been the foundation of the world order for centuries. This includes the nation-state, hence the model of international relations that is based on interaction between nation-states. I would also say that it means the idea of sovereignty also becomes a part of history. That's why it is so important to think about new principles. This collapse leads not only to a chance to build a fairer world order, but to numerous new threats stemming from a lack of understanding. What does this polycentricity mean? How will new centers of power be determined? On what principles will they function? How will relations between them be formed? What will be institutional framework of these relations, and so on? Today we are already facing some problems associated with the formation of new polycentric world order. I would highlight 5 main problems here. First, it is a crisis not only of global governance institutions, but also of regional security systems or regional security orders. What is happening in Ukraine is a consequence of the absence of a regional security system in Europe. what is happening in the Middle East, or what is happening in South Asia, are the consequences of the absence of such order in these regions. Note that I named 3 regions, South Asia, Middle East, Europe, that form a conflict belt that cuts the entire world into 2 parts. Second moment, a second problem. It is a crisis of responses to common threats and challenges, which have already been discussed a lot today. Water, climate change, food resources, artificial intelligence, and so on. Today, there is no point in talking about a global response to these global challenges. Third, it is ground national egoism and nationalism. Both, it seems to me, are a response to the crisis of statehood. And this crisis of statehood, in my opinion, is the result, and in fact all this global disorder, is a result of social and demographic changes in the world. There are more people, they have become more educated and more active. But political systems and political regimes are not ready for these changes. Hence the crisis. Hence populism and nationalism. Hence the unpreparedness for international cooperation. Fourth problem, nationalism and populism indicate a crisis of the moral foundation of politics. The Bandung principles were, first of all, ethical principles. But what to do if reality has become too complex for unambiguous ethical answers? The right of nations to self-determination conflicts with the principle of sovereignty. The principle of non-interference in the internal affairs in other countries conflicts with the need to protect human rights. Each side in any conflict develops its own narrative, explaining its position from a moral point of view. In these circumstances, force becomes the key factor. Sukarno, whom I already mentioned in the same speech, said, "The colonial problem is not a problem of rights. The colonial problem is a problem of forces." In other words, independence and freedom are not what is given, but what is taken. Now we find ourselves in similar circumstances again, but on a global scale. This is dangerous. And therefore we need to prepare the conditions to form an understanding of international relations that will be based on common moral assessments. Finally, fifthly, we're faced with the crisis of the image of the future. The people who participated in Bandung had gone through a difficult life path by that time. They fought, they struggled, they sat in prisons, they were tortured. But they saw the image of a wonderful future, their own independent states. Today, when we talk about the future, we speak negatively at best. We're afraid of epidemics and environmental disasters, major wars and armed conflicts, terrorism, and the rise of artificial intelligence. We don't want any of this. And what do we want? It is unknown. In these conditions, the world's key nations face 2 crucial challenges. Firstly, they must work tirelessly to reinforce the systems of international security based on the international law and the UN Charter. The latter is especially important as these formal principles are the only thing that stands between us and the Chair House. Secondly, they must take the irreversibility of change as a given and devise new principles of the new order. They requires expanding dialogue formats, working in cooperation on the polycentricity concept itself and outlining it in concrete forms. We should admit that the nations of Global South, a significant part of which still ascribe to the principles of non-alignment movement, are Russia's natural allies in these efforts. Meanwhile, if the efforts of the first tasks are obviously made in cooperation, the partnership in the second aspect has just begun, particularly in the BRICS Plus format. The following short-term objectives can be pointed out. First, creating an alternative foundation for international financial and economic system. And you know that on the BRICS platform, they work a lot on this. The second moment, intensifying international cooperation in science and technology in order to counter common challenges and threats. I think here the progress is, we can be satisfied by the progress in this field, especially between the global south countries. But I think that it is very important and underestimating moment and field of cooperation. The first moment, developing new approach to the resolution of regional conflicts and reinforcement of regional security systems. Russia, for example, offered a new concept of collective security in the Persian Gulf or Arab Gulf. It depends how do you want to call it. In Russia, it is Persian Gulf. We work on Palestinian issue, especially with we have organized a meeting between 14 Palestinian political movements this last year. So we try to do something, but of course the regional conflicts have become too complex, and we need some new approach to resolve them. The fourth moment, creating a new global system of transport and logistics, and we should mention Chinese initiative, One Belt, One Road, of course, here. And finally, the fifth moment, finding ways of fair interaction between societies with different values. I think that if we can work today, and there is a work today between global powers and not global powers, between many powers on other aspects, this aspect of the dialogue on the values, how different cultures can coexist, keeping their own values traditions, it is one of the main problems for the moment. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vasily Kuznetsov. Russia's worldview, in many respects, resonates with our worldview in Pakistan also, and then of course we are now allies in SEO, and there'll be more and more greater convergence between our two countries in terms of regional linkages and infrastructural linkages, which are coming up very fast. So we are happy to welcome you here. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I move on to the Ambassador Nagmana. As I mentioned earlier, she is a very distinguished have been a member of our Pakistan Foreign Service, a great Chinese expert. She has served in many other countries also, Belgium, Luxembourg, Ireland, as ambassador. So, but she has a special distinction of being an expert on China. So please go ahead.
Thank you very much, sir. To begin with, I'm not an expert on China or anything else. I am just a retired diplomat with 37 odd years of service. So these are just my own observations and what I think after having served in China for 2 terms. But to begin with, I would like to, of course, thank Dr. Masuma Hasan and the Pakistan Institute for International Affairs for inviting me yet again to this very, very important conference. And Senator Mushahid Hussain would agree with me that, because we go to a lot of conferences, that it is really a great pleasure to come to the Pakistan Institute of International Affairs, because their conferences are always extremely well organized and thought-provoking and intellectually at a very high level. So one has to struggle to keep the standard and, be at mark. So, I think the sessions we have had today have been very, very informative and very thought-provoking. So I'm very grateful that I'm part of it. Now, coming to the topic that has assigned to me, and which is the phenomenal rise of China. In my view, this is an open-ended topic, multifaceted, and there are many dimensions to it. So if we start to talk about the phenomenal rise of China, then one can talk for days and weeks and months, and still we'd be discussing and learning new things. So having only about between 15 to 20 minutes, I will try and wrap up some of my own observations as far as the rise of China is concerned. Now, in my view, the most seminal development of the 20th century was the establishment of the Communist Party of China, which was established in 1921. And the purpose of the establishment of the Communist Party of China was to lead a struggle to take China out of the 100 years of humiliation and colonization and imperialism and create a new China. Now, with the relentless struggle and undeterred determination, they were finally able to establish what we now called New China, or the People's Republic of China, in October 1949. Now the question is, was that the end in itself? In my humble opinion, that was actually not the end, because taking China out of the 100 years of humiliation was not the end objective. Because after taking it out of 100 years of humiliation and then, shooting it down the drain of poverty and underdevelopment was not the idea. So the Communist Party of China had a long-term strategic vision for the new dispensation and a long-term strategy in order to achieve that. And I think that was announced at the time the People's Republic of China came into existence. And that is documented in two of their goals. Their first goal was the elimination of extreme poverty by the time the Communist Party of China becomes 100 years old. And the second centennial goal was, of course, the rejuvenation of the motherland by the time the People's Republic of China becomes 100 years old, which it will by 2048. And everything else that China has done is in support of achieving these two objectives. And the Chinese leadership, they are a civilizational state, so they have this civilizational ethos and wisdom and sagacity and also strategic patience to work tediously in order to achieve their goals. And the founding fathers very early had realized that there has to be a new way of dealing with the rest of the world in order to ensure that the rise of China and the elimination of poverty. And that is why the Bandung Conference was held in 1955, and it was, the agreement, the Bandung Declaration was signed. But it was in 1953 that Chu Enlai had already discussed this idea with the visiting Indian delegation to Beijing. This idea of the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. And then later he discussed it formally with India and Burma and Indonesia, and eventually that paved the way for the Bandung Conference and the Bandung Declaration. At this point, I would just like to say, because we've talked a lot about Bandung Conference and the spirit of Bandung and everything, in my humble opinion, whether you call it the spirit or whatever, that spirits don't die. Values like this don't die. And ideologies like this don't die. And you can see it may have gone into hibernation and may have not have worked for a while, but you see the reincarnation of the spirit of Bandung in the way that China has led its rise, in the peaceful rise of China. It is not through exploitation, it is not through colonization, it itself as a with the countries that call themselves developed, even to this day, they say we are a moderately developed country working towards making China a middle income country by 2048. As far as the rise of China is concerned, I think it is no-brainer. We all know that for hundreds of years, different people had predicted that China would rise, that the political and economic center of the world will shift from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Napoleon said it, as you would recall, that let the giant sleep for a few weeks, the world will shake. And we're seeing the shaking of that, of the world, because the giant has risen. And you quoted Iqbal. I would also like to quote Iqbal, because in 1936, he said, "Gara khap chini संभलने लगे, हिमालय के चश्मे उबलने लगे, गया दौरे सरमाया दारी गया, tamasha दिखा के मदारी गया." Now he's saying that at the height of capitalism. So here, what we are seeing as a result of the peaceful rise of China is something more than just a country rising to political and economic power. The fuss is not about another country becoming and competing you in your financial domain or your political for political position. But this is a competition or a confrontation, because the West feels that it's the very basis on which its society, its economy, its governance, and its political order is established is being challenged by the rise of China. And why do I say so? I say so because the pattern that they have, or the methodology that the Chinese have used for their peaceful rise is contradictory to what the philosophy of governance and statehood the West has. And this is what's bothering them, because they have been telling the rest of the world that Western kind of democracy is the best kind of democracy, and that communism will fail. Their economic philosophy will fail, their social philosophy will fail, their governance philosophy will fail, and their political system will not survive. And they became sort of more strong in their belief that it would fail after the disintegration of the Soviet Union. Now they were so busy, as someone earlier also said, you also mentioned, that the West was so busy in their, in their foreign fights and their wars all over the world, that particularly after the disintegration of Soviet Union, that they did not really pay attention to where China was going or trying to understand China better. They thought Soviet Union is gone, China will also fail like that. But what they did not realize, that what China was practicing was not communism a la USSR. It was very different. And I say so because that is what led to the division of USSR and China in 1953-54. Because the USSR president told Chairman Mao that we need to bring more communism to China. And he said, no, we don't need to bring more communism to China. We need to bring more China to communism. Now, why do they say so? Because their philosophers from last 5,000 years believe that every country must choose a path, whether it is their economy or their governance or their political dealings, dependent upon their civilizational ethos, the strength of the nation, and the ultimate goals that you have in a peaceful manner. So there is no one size fit all. So every country must look at what is the best governance system, the best political system, the best economic system that they have in order to take their people into development and a better life and to protect their country. And based on that, over the years, the initial communism has changed into what the Chinese call socialism with Chinese characteristics. And the West actually got a very, very rude shock in 2019, to be specific, October 2019, because that was the time when New China became 70 years old, and Communist Party of China was going to become 100 years old by May 2020. And they achieved absolute elimination of absolute poverty from China 8 months before the targeted date. And not only that, they surpassed that year West in 5G, in AI. They landed on the dark side of the moon. They landed a rover on the running comet. They sent a mission to Mars, and they started their long march, what do you call these rockets that take they started the International Space Agent. And suddenly, the West woke up saying, what has happened? Because they thought that, they will never be able to achieve that one, the first centennial goal. And now if you read the literature and the books and the articles that are now coming in the West, Europe and America, that they are realizing that this is a system that needs a little bit more attention. And particularly in COVID, they thought was a great opportunity to show that the alternate ideology, the alternate systems that China is advocating vis-a-vis the established norms of Western system superiority will now be wiped out, because China will not be able to sustain the attack of COVID. But we are all witness to the fact that they not only surmounted those difficulties, but went further beyond, and they came out as the only economy that was not really affected by, and they changed their systems in a manner that they not only saved themselves, but saved the rest of the world from COVID. And this is also the year that on purchase power parity, China had already overcome the US as the largest economy. Their foreign exchange and their reserves have many times those of the Americans. In fact, the US now owns trillions to the Chinese. And that is why your sanctions are also not working. Because this phenomenal rise of China, first making it into the production house of the world, then making it a leader in agricultural technology, new technologies, science and technology and AI and 5G, and in governance models, they are leaving the rest of the world behind. And it was after the achievement of their first centennial goal that you see a change in the rhetoric of China also. Before October 2019, you did not hear Chinese bring out a counter narrative or allow their diplomats or their media to question the West. But now, powered by the strength of their development and this proven strength of their ideology and the direction in which they are going, they are now beginning to bring out a counter narrative in which the developing world is with them. Why is the developing world with them? Because, again, their system and their ideology, I think, emanates from the Bandung spirit of taking people along and not rising alone. And that is why the entire sort of model of assistance or loans or grants that China has is very, very different from that of the West. It is based on the needs of the receiving country rather than demands being made by China to suit their interests. With the result that the developing countries have become more, they're more comfortable with dealing with China, and particularly after the launch of the Belt and Road Initiative, which was already in the making for about 2 decades, but it hadn't really not taken off because technologically and economically, China was not that strong. Now, once it could afford that kind of money to be invested, it launched the Belt and Road Initiative in earnest, of which now over 150 countries are members. And because it is such a center of the world for production, that all the value chains go via China. So when you put sanctions on the Chinese, everybody gets disturbed. And like some of my colleagues said that, and we've written about it and talked about it, that China is today far more strong, economically, politically, morally, and is now increasing its stature as a mediator. So now when things are going wrong in the world, people are no longer looking at Norway and Europe or the Americans. They are looking where? They're looking at Turkey, they're looking at the Gulf, and they are then looking at China. So the rise of China, as I said, the fuss is not just about its political and economic rise. The fuss is about much more. China itself says it does not want to be the sole superpower. We are not in this number game of being number 3, number 2, number 1. Chinese philosophy believes, or at least that is what they propagate, is that the world is big enough to accommodate several centers of power, and like everybody else, like the Western world, they also have the right to take their people out of poverty and give them the hope that hope for the future. And because I've watched China for 25 years now and I've been posted there twice. When you go to China now, it's a different China. It is a China, and it is, you may call it, as I said, it's an open-ended topic, and you can go on days about speaking about various aspects. But if you go to China today, you leave the democracies aside, the Communist Party of China and President Xi Jinping has 98% approval rating, which is the best in the world. And against popular perception, there are actually 8 political parties in China, and there is immense debate, but not in the media and not at public platforms. In fact, recently, Nancy Pelosi herself, when she, went to Taiwan and had to then, spite her nose, cut her nose to spite her face, whatever. And then she had to go and say that Chinese society is the freest of all societies and the most devolved governance model in the world, because they believe earnestly that the power of a state comes from the power of the last individual in the last little village of your country. Because unless you have the people with you, you cannot really have that strength. So they have internal debates, and all their leaders come through a very, very rigorous training and rigorous they start at the lowest level of governance to come up. Even President Xi Jinping was refused 9 times. He applied for the membership of Communist Party and he was refused. Although he was the son of one of the prominent leaders that achieved the establishment of new China, his father was purged. And it was only 10th time that he was brought to that position. And now there are, a lot of people have some misperceptions saying it's dictatorial and whatever, and now he has unlimited time. So I think we need to look at where the country is coming from. The country's second centennial goal is the rejuvenation of the motherland, which means that all their renegade provinces, which are under, not occupation, but sort of like Taiwan is under Western influence, and all, when they all come back to their motherland and they have achieved, they become the, the top economy and have political power more than any other country. So now it is actually making the West nervous, because they have now seen for the last 70 years that China, when it sets a goal, it achieves it. And it achieves without any war, without any threats, without any exploiting anybody. That is why Zamir Akram Saab will talk more about it. I don't want to go into that, but that is why this entire geostrategic flux and the geoeconomic flux that we're seeing in the world, and the apprehension that this will finally end up being played out in the Indian Ocean or in the Pacific, and this pepping up of India against China, and pressurizing the Southeast Asian countries and certain countries to de-link from China, is all in order to contain China. That is it. We had the China Containment Act, and one of the silliest, aspect of that act was that America allocated $300 million a year for the media for misinformation and disinformation on China and its ultimate goals. And but to wrap up a long thing, because we don't have time, I would say that as far as Pakistan is concerned, we have always had good relations with China, exemplary relations with China. Today we have all-weather strategic cooperative partnership. China does not believe in alliances. It believes in win-win models and partnerships. And never have we in history, ever, compromised our relationship with China for the West, irrespective of the pressures and the demands that we've had from the Western side over the years, including during the time when we were C2 and CENTO members. We firmly stayed our course, and we did not, for example, send troops in the Korean War, because we did not want our troops to come face to face with the Chinese troops. And there are hundreds of other examples of how we have maintained this relationship with China, even when we were non-NATO allies of the Americans. Our relationship with China has never been open to discussion. So a lot of people talk about in the press that Pakistan now needs to keep a balance, and we are facing this demand from the West. We face those demands from the West. We in the Foreign Office are very aware of those demands and how we have, been able to stand against those demands. Because if we hadn't, we would not have Camera, we would not have VA, we would not have the nuclear power plants, we would not have energy, we would not have CPAC, we would not have Camera, or our JF-17s and JS-10s and now JC-20, and our submarines and frigates and ships. So I think nobody should have any doubt that the spirit of Bandung lives through the actions and policies of China, and that is what is attracting the Africans, the South East Asian nations, the South Americans and Central Asian nations, and even the Europeans, because there is a rift there also, and that is also worrying Trump and or the US, and it has been worrying the US for a while, because even on China, Europe is divided. And for Europe to be divided just shows the strength of China as an economic and political power, but also as a moral, peaceful force, and a force for the benefit of the partners rather than the exploitation of the partners. And I'm sure that in future also we will continue to not maintain balance, but we firmly have a strategic compass focused where our forefathers or founding fathers wanted it to be, because that is what is in our national interest. Before I end, I would just like to, I'll end it on a small, it's a story. But you would recall that President Ayub went in the 60s for a state visit to Washington. 60 state visit to Washington. And the president there, after, the big dinner and talks, told President Ayub Khan that, we give you, they used to give us a lot of aid at that time. We give you so much aid and we support you so much and we've given you so much for development. The Chinese are poor, this, that, and the other. But despite everything that we do, you go and sleep with the Reds, meaning that we still favor the Chinese. And I have no love for dictatorships, but I think he gave a very, very good answer. And that answer is valid even today as far as our relationship with China is concerned. He said, if we lose America, we lose our commercial interests. But if we lose China, we lose our national interest. So I'll stop there, because as I said, they've given me an open-ended, because it's such an open-ended topic, there's so many aspects, you can go on and on and on. So but I just wanted to round it up a little bit. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Nagmana, for this very comprehensive presentation on phenomenal rise of China. The test of a country is not entirely only in what it does for its own people and within the country, but also what it does for the rest of the world. And in that, if you see, starting with ASEAN, how their destiny had changed just from the very beginning of the China's emergence as an industrial hub. And then even today, India's economy, although they have problems with each other, serious problems, and India does anything to, step China, but then still India is so dependent on imports from China for the good of its industry. So China is something that, does all the good to not only its own self, but the rest of the world. So thank you very much.
Just to add last sentence, regarding the Bandung spirit, I think you can clearly see it in Xi Jinping's concept of global development initiative, global security initiative, global civilizational institution, and their philosophy that mankind has a shared future. And in order to ensure the security, safety, development, happiness of the entire world, because as humanity, we all have the same future, I think rings again very loud and displays the Bandung spirit.
Well, according to the latest leaks, United States spends about $1.3 billion on disinformation on China. Yeah. It's not 300, $1.3 billion. And unfortunate thing for them,
it's a law.
Act. And the unfortunate thing for the Americans themselves has been that they believed in that disinformation until the surprise that has emerged now in a few weeks back. So thank you very much, Nagamana. Now I request Ambassador Zamir Akram for this very interesting subject. Have the defense alliances brought global peace? Ambassador Zamir Akram is an advisor to the Strategic Plans Division of the Government of Pakistan. He has served as Pakistan's ambassador and permanent representative to UN for a very considerable long time. And he is, and the latest book that he's authored on, does it have a mention here? Yeah, the security imperatives, Pakistan's nuclear deterrence and diplomacy. It's a great book, and I would recommend to anybody interested in this. So, Ambassador, please go ahead.
Thank you, Kazi Sahib, for your kind of international affairs, and especially to Dr. Masuma Hasan for honoring me by inviting me to speak in this very important conference. I have been assigned a topic which sort of shifts gears from looking at Russia and China to looking at defense alliances. And the question is very clearly whether defense alliances have brought global peace. And in my opinion, the short answer is no. And I will try to explain my answer by giving a bit of a structural analysis of what defense alliances all are about, and then looking at some of these alliances and operations. So, defense alliances obviously can be bilateral or multilateral, and they can be formal or informal. The key requirement for a defense alliance to work is that there must exist a strategic convergence between the members of that alliance. And the other factor that we need to understand is that defense alliances are bound by time and space. Time, because this alliance can be meaningful as long as the convergence of interests lasts, and space, because in virtually every case, this defense, any defense alliance is geographically specific to a particular area. There are obviously internal dynamics in any kind of defense alliance, changes in strategic interests, changes or emergence of threat perceptions, changes in the of threat perceptions. Clear indicators are some of the defense alliances like NATO, where the French have pursued a different approach. Today, the United States is pursuing a different approach to NATO, whereas in the old erstwhile Warsaw Pact, the Yugoslavians had a different approach. So there are differences of this nature in any defense alliance. The essential part is that defense alliances are not designed or not meant by the participating countries to promote global peace, but to ensure their own collective security. That is the essence of any security alliance. Most importantly, for peace to be maintained, as opposed to security of the members of the alliance, for peace to be maintained in that region where that alliance exists, there has to be a countervailing alliance. If there is no countervailing alliance, then you will have a breakdown of peace and security. So this is more or less, in very brief terms, the structural approach, looking at this. And now, from the historical point of view, of course, we know that in the post-Cold War, post-Second World War world, the United States and the Soviet Union were caught in a bipolar contest. And during this Cold War, the two sides had evolved and emerged into two competing military alliances, NATO and the Warsaw Pact. NATO was launched first, and Churchill, in his usual way, explained the rationale for NATO as being to keep the Russians down, to keep the Russians out of Europe, to keep the Russians out, to keep the Americans in, and the Germans down. So that was the original approach to the creation of NATO. And of course, the Soviet Union then aligned with its Eastern European partners to create the Warsaw Pact. These two alliances created, because the major players were armed with nuclear weapons, what is called the balance of terror, or based on nuclear deterrence. And that's what maintained peace in Europe for the longest possible time in European history. However, this was specific to Europe. This alliance was specific to Europe at that time. And for that reason, there was no peace and security outside of Europe. So we know that there is this references to the Cold War on the periphery. And the peripheries were the wars in North Korea and in Vietnam and the Middle East and other places in which the major powers were acting through their proxies and using alliances with the local regional powers to promote and project their interests. It is in this environment, of course, linking this presentation to the overall theme of our conference, it was in this environment, of course, that the middle powers realized the need for insulating themselves from this great power rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, and that was the basis for the Bandung Conference and then eventually the creation of the non-aligned movement. But here I want to give an assessment of how the great powers saw the non-aligned movement. I want to share with you an anecdote from my experience when I was a junior officer in our embassy in Moscow in the Soviet Union in the early 1980s. And the Afghan war was going on. Sahibzada Yaqub Khan, the foreign minister, visited Moscow, and official talks were held with Mr. Gromyko, the Soviet foreign minister. And Sahibzada Sahib was holding forth on how Pakistan is not representing or promoting American interests, but it is acting as a non-aligned country in the defense of the independence of another non-aligned country, Afghanistan, which has been invaded by the Soviet Union. So when Sahibzada Sahib finished his long presentation, Mr. Gromyko replied, "Mr. Foreign Minister, there are only two really non-aligned countries in this world. One is the Soviet Union and the other is the United States. All other countries of the world are members of this alliance in varying degrees." And of course, we know that that was true, because our neighbor, though being a leader of the non-aligned movement, saw this opportunity also to play off the United States against the Soviet Union, which to a great extent it is still doing in playing off the United States against Russia. In any case, once the Soviet Union disintegrated in 1991, and the bipolar world order turned into a unipolar order dominated by the United States after 1991, the non-aligned movement to a large extent became irrelevant. And from that point to this time, it is still searching for relevance. But I think that current developments or recent developments perhaps point to a resurgence, but I'll come to that in a bit. So with the unipolar order, of course, the United States tried to impose its will, its own approach towards global domination, pursuing a zero-sum policy, denying the opportunity for any country to emerge as a peer competitor of the United States. However, this unilateral approach that the US pursued led them into several misadventures in Afghanistan, in Iraq, Syria, Libya, and elsewhere, while at the same time, as we've heard from Nagmana, the Chinese were assiduously developing their country, and to a very large extent, Russia was also engaged in its resurgence. And more to the point, because of the American pursuit of global hegemony, these two powers, Russia and China, gravitated towards each other and concluded first the friendship treaty between the two of them, and secondly concluded the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and then later with several other countries from the middle powers, the BRICS organization and others, in which they have been working with the developing countries, or the middle powers as I call them. So what we have seen is that while this multipolar system has evolved globally, there are growing forces that are meant to control or act as countervailing forces to US unipolar hegemony. The US, while it has encouraged NATO to enhance its sphere of operations from Europe to South Asia, to the Middle East, to the Pacific, to the Indian Ocean, and has entered into multilateral alliances such as the Quadrilateral Alliance and the AUKUS Alliance with its Western and Southeast Asian partners. The Russians and the Chinese have also developed their own abilities to counter the growth of American power in different parts of the world. In Europe, we know very well, the Russians have responded to NATO expansionism, and the spread of American influence, and the Ukraine war is a consequence of that Russian response in order to protect its own national interests. And in the Asia-Pacific region, we are increasingly seeing growing tensions between China and the United States and its other allies over the South China Sea, over the issue of Taiwan. And in this situation, there is a greater opportunity for the middle powers, what we used to call the non-aligned countries, still the non-aligned countries. There are greater opportunities for these non-aligned countries to work for their own national interests by having greater choice in the present multipolar order. India has described this policy as strategic autonomy, and it makes sense for others also to look at opportunities for themselves in this multipolar order. The most important thing is that this multipolar order, with the emergence of countries like China and Russia as major global players, the interests of the smaller countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America can be better protected. Again, as Nagmana has dilated on the issue of how China has been helping these developing countries. So to conclude, defense alliances do not contribute to peace and security at the global level because of time and space, and also that they can only ensure peace and security within a specified regional area and for a certain period of time, and only when there is a countervailing force or a countervailing alliance. Now, to relate this, before concluding, to relate this to two very key areas of importance to us. First, very briefly, the Middle East, where we have seen the US-Israeli military alliance, formal, informal, whatever it may be, operate in a way which has led to virtually the complete violation of the international order, of the UN Charter, and the exercise of complete breakdown of any kind of humanity. So what we have seen is genocide. What we are witnessing is genocide in the Middle East. The reason is that there is no countervailing force to this alliance. And that is why the Israelis are able to get away with what they have done. Literally, they have been able to get away with murder. In South Asia, again, there is a US alliance, this time with India. And we have seen the Indians using this alliance to rearm themselves, to realize their dream of becoming not just a hegemonical regional hegemon, but a global power. And in this effort, the target has been Pakistan in particular, but also other smaller nations of South Asia. Now, what we are facing today in terms of the challenges that we see arising from Indian threats that we see being expressed on a daily basis or an hourly basis, in fact, on Indian media following the incidents in Pahalgam, is very similar to what happened in 2019 or before that. But the difference is, the big difference is, and for that we need to be very thankful, and that is that Pakistan has a countervailing ability and capability that can prevent the kind of actions that India would want to take, that India would like to take against Pakistan, but cannot do so because, essentially because of nuclear deterrence that prevails between Pakistan and India. It is this nuclear deterrence that prevents the Indians from behaving in a way that Israel behaves in the Middle East. They would dearly like to do so, but they can't because they have to deal with Pakistan's countervailing force. So this is my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Zamir Akram, for this very excellent presentation on the security aspects. Well, to round up the subject, historically, power alignments have been shaped by ideological affinities, as we know from the history, and Ambassador Zamir also made out, economic dependencies, and security concerns. These are the three important considerations. In the contemporary context, however, alignments are increasingly influenced by pragmatic considerations and transforming global dynamics. So the old school is behind us. We have entered into a new, entirely a new global landscape. China's phenomenal rise triggered unprecedented changes in the global geopolitical and economic power structure. Later, assertive Russia, after its economic recovery and domestic stability, added to the process. These developments decisively eroded US-led unipolar world order, as we heard, which emerged following the collapse of Soviet Union. World today is marked by plurality of poles and the rise of new powers. Economic interests, technological competition, and different visions of global governance compel the nations to navigate through complex landscape, balancing relations with competing powers. Global geopolitical landscape continues to fluctuate speedily. If you see in this matter of months, matter of weeks, it changes, transforms with such a terrific speed. The nations now have to align, balance, or stay neutral in response to shifting dynamics of global power. The speed of changes is related to the variations in balance of power. Strategic choices that the countries make are determined by their perceptions of their position in the international system and what alignments will best serve their national interest. Neutral nations with cautious, pragmatic, or even opportunistic approach do complicate, at times, multipolar landscape. This can, at times, make balance of power fluid and unpredictable. Broadening of choices for the international landscape has enabled, enabled the countries of Global South to increasingly assert their autonomy, diversify their partnerships, resisting pressures to align themselves with major powers. The ongoing conflicts in Gaza, Ukraine, and Sudan, as well as elsewhere, have prompted regional actors to act with greater autonomy in addressing security challenges. There is a greater tendency in favor of localized, responsive security arrangements. The prospect of national transformation through the development of regional communication and infrastructure linkages is having important bearing on the alignments countries are choosing. These transformations on the global landscape are naturally viewed by Western countries as a challenge to the centuries-old hegemonic dominance of the world. And they are in no mood to relent easily. The fall of Soviet Union reduced the utility of military alliances. But despite the demise of Warsaw Pact, NATO continued to exist, not only exist, but expanded beyond the original scope. Why? To maintain historical hegemony of the Western countries over the rest of the world. Formation of AQUAS Quad, I2U2, etc., manifest continued imperialist mindset and strategy of Western powers. On the other hand, BRICS, BRI, ASEAN, and SEO represent more broader cooperation preferences of China, Russia, and Global South. The permutations and transformations during the past 3 decades have followed an interesting trail. It was China's emergence as a global industrial production hub that imparted positive impulse to the economies of neighboring ASEAN countries. They gained most in terms of supply chains, trade volumes, and values. Under the leadership of President Putin, Russia asserted its role in the global affairs. The multi-faceted Sino-Russian cooperation opened new avenues of Euro-Asian economic, strategic, and communication linkages. This led to the establishment of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It now has 10 members and 14 dialogue partners. Well, members are regional countries, but the list of partners is very interesting. It includes Turkey, which is member of NATO, Sri Lanka, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Cambodia, Nepal, Egypt, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Maldives, Myanmar, Bahrain, and UAE. I mean, it's so diversified list, which shows that the urge of the countries to find where their interests lie. China came up with One Belt and One Road initiative. This is more than $1 trillion initiative, was based on the theme that in this interdependent, economically globalized, and culturally diversified world, the economic growth and development need to be more inclusive and balanced. As the international trade and economy diversified, there was a rise in regional economic poles on the global landscape. This created scope for tricontinental BRICS bloc. This forum has given fresh perspectives to the economic integration and cooperation between the emerging economies. Combined economic power of BRICS Plus represents a formidable counterbalance to the Western dominance. The duality of allegiance among many SEO and BRICS member and partner states reflects a complex interplay of economic and security considerations. For instance, Saudi Arabia has partner status in SEO. It is expected to take over as member of BRICS, but it relies on US military support for its overall security while engaging with China on economic projects and arms deals. Turkey, though a NATO member, has partner status in SEO and is expected to have the same status in BRICS. But India beats them all. It has taken a page out of imperialist playbook of divide and exploit. It spares no effort to cash on its border dispute with China. It is founding member of BRICS and member of SEO, at the same time, member of Quad with the United States, Japan, Australia. Quad has explicit objective of containing China. After 9/11, US went ahead with this policy of forever wars. These destructive wars involved several Muslim countries from Afghanistan to Libya. They caused widespread devastation with tens of millions dead and uprooted. Millions had to seek refuge across the Mediterranean as legal or illegal immigrants. in Europe, which has now become an issue in Europe and sadly has reinforced Islamophobia, and the fallout is still continuing. As if this was not enough, the USA, instead of implementing two-state solution to which they were and remain committed, enabled endless Israeli genocide in Gaza and other parts of Palestine. In his first term of office, President Trump recognized occupied Jerusalem and Golan Heights as parts of Israel. He ordered shifting of American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in blatant violation of international law. In Europe, the proxy war in Ukraine was waiting to happen after Maidan coup. In 2014, an acceleration of drive to include Ukraine in NATO. Besides its historical role in war and peace in Europe, Russia, with nearly 6,000 nuclear warheads and more than 17 million kilometer territory, with huge natural resources, has rightful claim to be part of any global or security architecture. President Trump has now acknowledged the folly of Ukraine war. Negotiations are in progress for peace settlement, to the annoyance of his European NATO allies. But when it comes to issues of war and peace in Palestine, President Trump becomes merciless hawk. He's indifferent to Netanyahu's carnage in Gaza and West Bank. With no sense of legal or human morality, he proposed ethnic cleansing of more than 2 million Palestinians out of Gaza to transform it into American Riviera. Negotiations are in progress on Iran nuclear issue, but and if Mr. Trump does not allow himself to be nudged by Prime Minister Netanyahu, chances of their success are bright, given the regional consensus on the issue. Hopefully, this regional consensus led by Saudi Arabia will spread further towards the solution of Palestine issue and safeguard to forestall external sources of conflict in the region. The year 2025 can be a pivotal moment in the evolution of global power alignments. With Trump's tariff war against friend and foe, Europe's economic headwinds, transatlantic differences and specter of NATO's demise, new discoveries and progress of high-tech competition, etc. The list is long, which will define and they are predictable, they can be predicted or difficult to predict. But these will redefine the traditional paradigms of alliances in future. The nations, therefore, will have to be prepared to navigate through the complex array of challenges and opportunities. Thank you all. And now, do we have time to...
We overstepped.
We started a little late.
Yeah, I think it's too late.
Any question?
Thank you very much. I have a question from Ambassador Nagmana. To what extent Pakistan can follow the Chinese model of development, and what is the obstacle in the way within Pakistan to adopt that model? If you can briefly comment on that. Thank you so much.
I think I believe in the Chinese philosophy that every nation has to determine for themselves what model best suits them. So we cannot borrow the Chinese model because our civilizational ethos is very different. Our capacities are very different. Our challenges are very different. Our people are very different. And our geography is very different. So I think it would be very wrong to say that we adopt that model. No, we should not adopt any model. We should sit down and think what best suits us. If democracy, then what kind of democracy? Do we want a presidential form of democracy? Do we want a parliamentary form of democracy? Do we want, like like in Europe, do we have, you have kings and queens and whatnot? Or do we want to have an indirect democracy like the American democracy, which is not direct, So you have to decide for yourself what best suits your circumstances and what will best serve your national interest and the interest of your people. We are not Chinese, so we cannot have that system. We are different.
Thank you very much. I have questions to Ambassador Akram about the multilaterals groupings. I think in the past, the defense alliance like NATO and also those led by Russia, like CSTO, some SCO also compete. But how about the multilateral groupings led by the emerging powers? Like Saudi, for example, has an alliance on war in Yemen, for example, and also a number of different countries now establish the defense alliance in the small lateral forms. Is it threatening to global order, or is it only a normal part of the emerging multipolar international order? Thank you very much.
I personally don't think that SCO or BRICS or these are military alliances or defense alliances. They are, we can say maybe they're alliances for security and cooperation, economic cooperation and other things, but they're not defense alliances in the nature of NATO. NATO is a clear-cut defense military alliance, and it has the purposes of NATO are different from those of the SCO. So I think there are two different things that we are talking about. Yes, there is even the bilateral Russian-Chinese treaty is not technically a defense partnership. Okay, it's a broad relationship covering all kinds of issues, including defense issues. So that's the difference that I think. But what I mean, what I see as a hopeful sign is the fact that the developing countries have a greater choice in terms of their partnerships in a multilateral world as compared to a unipolar world, or even in a bipolar world. Even now, today, with three major world powers, they are the three great powers, then there are a whole lot of 4 or 5 middle-sized powers. So there is a greater degree of choice and options for the developing countries. I mean, China offers a cooperation which is quite different in terms of what is offered by the United States, on terms that are quite different. So I think that this is the opportunity that we should actually welcome in a multipolar world.
Sir, would you like to suggest or advise for a military alliance like NATO? They have a method, NATO, the future war. Would you like to suggest and advise for military alliance like SCO countries, military alliance?
No, I don't think that we need to enter into any military alliance. As Nagmana has said, and it's very well known, that China does not, as a matter of principle, enter into any kind of alliance military or otherwise alliance with any country. It has a strategic partnership with Pakistan, but the word strategic is very broadly interpreted in terms of the kind of relationship we have, which is defense, it's economic, it's technical, cultural, it's very broad-based, so that's why we call it strategic. But it is not focused exclusively on military, and I don't think...
No, it's not the need.
No,
War is not the need of time, sorry.
I think the need of the time is, as I mentioned in the closing of my statement, we have already taken care of our security, so you can rest assured.
So let's have a last question. The gentleman there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the panelists for their insightful remarks. My question is towards Mr. Zamir Akram Saab. Sir, how do you see the role Pakistan can play in this evolving world, especially its position in the UN Security Council at the moment? What are some challenges and opportunities do you see Pakistan going through, especially in the backdrop of the ever-changing power rivalry between the US and China? Thank you.
Okay, that's a very interesting question. I think that Pakistan's effort in the Security Council will be one of constructive engagement with all the powers, particularly the P5 countries. We have always this is not the first time that we are on the Security Council. We've been there, at least to my count, at least 5 times before. So we have experience of dealing with issues in the Security Council, and I think we will be guided by the Charter principles, by our own national interest, of course, and also by what is the right thing to do. So we will be very strongly opposed to what's happening in the Middle East. We will strongly condemn. We will be part of those countries that strongly condemn the Israeli policies against the Palestinians. We will ask for and call for a solution to the Middle East issue on the basis of the two-state solution. We will also endorse and support an effort to end the war in Ukraine. The Trump administration, right after it took over, moved a resolution in the Security Council, which we supported, to end the war in Ukraine. Similarly, we will look for other areas in which we can promote international peace and security. In terms of the present environment in this region, we are fully playing a major role. There is an effort to come up with a UN statement, a UN Security Council statement. We are in favor of the statement. However, the language of the statement is absolutely very essential and important for us, because that language must not give any indication that what has happened in Pahalgam is a basis on which the Indians can gain acceptance of Jammu and Kashmir being a part of India. So we have put the statement on hold. We are negotiating this. What we want is that it should be referred to either as disputed territory, or that it should be referred to at least as Indian administered Kashmir. But it cannot be referred to as a part of India. So these are the dynamics that are presently going on in the Security Council.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry we are short of time, and I thank everyone, and we conclude our session. Thank you so much, everybody.